Hello, everyone that is on and with us. My name is Jenny Geisbauer. I'm with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library Foundation, and you are tuning in to our first Final Draft Home Edition featuring our wonderful author, Kimmery Martin. Kimmery is a wonderful friend of the library, but also one of our great new authors out on the scene. But before I share a little bit about Kimmery, and before she gets into her talk, I just got to do a little housekeeping. So I want to remind everyone that if you are interested in purchasing Kimmery's book, The Antidote for Everything, Park Road Books here in Charlotte and Main Street Books in Davidson are waiting for your orders and will deliver those to you. They will ship them. But also you could go to your library, cmlibrary.org, and get your digital copy. So, but I do want to give a shout out to Park Road Books and Main Street Books here in Davidson, North Carolina. They are wonderful partners. Also, if you stopped by at Town Brewing Company, got your growler, here's my beer. They are another great partner. And so when we are out of this homestay, let's just call it, we will be back at Town Brewing Company with this quarterly series, Final Draft. So tonight, like I said, we have the one and only Kimmery Martin. I'm a huge fan of her. I love her new book. Could not put it down. And just a little bit about Kimmery. Kimmery, this book has really gotten a lot of rave reviews. So did her first book from the New York Times, Southern Living, Harvard Crimson, just to name a few. Kimmery is an ER doctor, which I think is really fascinating. But if you read her books, you understand. She is an emergency medicine doctor turned novelist. She is from Kentucky. She received her medical training at the University of Louisville in School of Medicine, as well as Vanderbilt University. She lives with a super cute husband who is also a doctor with 3 children at home, I think elementary, middle, and high school. So she has a deep appreciation right now for our teachers. And a little fun fact about Kimmery, she is world-class boggle champ. I don't think many of us can say that. I certainly cannot. But again, you would understand this if you read her book. Her grammar is incredible, and her she is like a walking thesaurus and dictionary. So, but last but not least, Kimmery is also a Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library trustee appointed this year, and we expect great things from her. And so, without further ado, Kimmery, it's yours.
Thank you, Jenny. That was a really great introduction. So I'm going to talk for a little bit about the book and myself and background stuff, and then we'll take some questions at the end. Yes.
Yes. And if you have questions, you can send them through the chat. We are monitoring those, and I will be happy to ask Kimmery those as we go along or at the end of your talk.
Okay. Well, like Jenny said, I am Kimmery Martin, the author of The Queen of Hearts and now The Antidote for Everything, which are both medical fiction. And I would love to talk to you about my latest book, The Antidote for Everything, which tells the story of what goes spectacularly wrong in the friendship between 2 doctors after one of them is unjustly fired. And as the title promises, the 2 characters do in the final chapter of the book determine what they believe to be the antidote for everything. And I would love to know, once y'all have read it, if you agree with them or not, because it's probably not exactly what you think. But before I get into the specifics of the book, I did learn on my last book tour that people often like to hear the backstory of the novel and of the author. And in my case, I get a lot of questions about how I got into writing, because I have been so blessed in my life to have these 2 really great career passions. One, obviously, is writing, and the other is the practice of medicine. And as Jenny said, I, in my day job, was an ER doctor. And I do love the practice of emergency medicine. I believe there is something so deeply rewarding about being able to make an immediate impact in the life of another human being at a time when they are ill or injured or suffering. And I also really liked the pace of the field and the procedures and the technical challenges and the problem-solving aspects, and especially the camaraderie that you experience in the emergency department. This is a really intense time to be an ER doctor. And I've actually been out of the ER for a few years to focus on my writing career. Although I did just sign up as a reserve physician for the state of North Carolina in the event that our doctors become ill in large numbers or are overwhelmed, as is happening right now in many parts of the country. And I'm in a lot of online medical groups with people around the country. And so I'm reading these accounts of literally almost unimaginable circumstances that my colleagues are finding themselves in, often without adequate protective equipment. So I don't want to dwell too much on what's going on around us right now, because we are looking at literature for an escape. I don't know if y'all are like me, but I'm reading everything I can get my hands on at home right now, and it is saving my sanity. I got into writing from the practice of emergency medicine because I have all of my life been an absolutely devoted, obsessive, fanatical reader. And I had this secret fantasy that I wanted to try writing a novel. And in my mind, that was, of course, a medical novel, because that's the world that I know the best. And I have found in the first part of my tour, certainly, that I think a lot of people share that same desire for reinvention. We reach this point where we are kind of just itching to try something new. Either you've been at the same career for a long time, or perhaps your children don't need you the same way they once did, or maybe just your interests evolve. But there is something really gratifying about putting yourself out there to try a brand new thing, stimulating your brain and reinventing yourself to pursue a passion. And in my case, taking a risk with no guarantee of succeeding. And I do always tell people that if there is any field with no guarantee of succeeding, it's writing a novel. I have read this often quoted statistic that about 80% of Americans would like to write a book. That's a lot of people. And it's really hard to get anyone to read a brand new author's work. I read somewhere else that one of the most impactful factors in whether or not a person decides to read a given book is the name recognition of the author. And for a lot of authors, including me, certainly, that makes things really difficult. Now, I've been telling this story on the first part of my tour. Just a few weeks before the book was published, I was having lunch with a friend of mine, and we were walking out of a restaurant in Uptown Charlotte, and this woman comes up to us, and she looks at me and she said, "Are you?" And my mind just filled in the rest of that sentence with the author, Kimmery Martin, even though that never happens. And I waited, and she said, "Aware that your shirt is completely unbuttoned?" So one thing about giving this talk on the computer is I hope someone laughed at that. I can't tell. Jenny's heard it before, so I don't know. But you can see in my case that it's actually a really good thing that I don't get recognized a lot. Now, I will say I told that story a few times, and now a few people have recognized me, and they usually have heard me tell the story, and so they make a big fuss over recognizing me, which is really nice. But when I first started writing, my path to publication was really long and humbling. I tried for more than a year, maybe 2 years even, to try to get representation from a literary agent. And I wound up having more than 100 rejections, not even of my manuscript, but of the letter I wrote describing the book itself. And it got to the point where I would hear my computer make the email noise and my face would just flame up in shame because I knew it was going to be another rejection of my letter. So I did eventually land an amazing literary agent, and she sold my first novel, The Queen of Hearts, fairly quickly to Penguin Random House. And it did get some national recognition, and it wound up completely changing my life. I decided to focus on writing for a few years, and I've been doing that hardcore ever since. So that kind of leads me to this new book, The Antidote for Everything. I do write exclusively medical fiction right now. It actually states in my contract with Penguin Random House that my books have to be medical, and they have to have a female doctor as the protagonist of the books. So it's pretty niche-y. I am finding that sometimes people are kind of surprised about the topic of this book. So the story is about a woman named Georgia, and she was a minor character in The Queen of Hearts, if you read that book. So it's about her and her closest friend, Jonah, and they are both practicing physicians in a bedroom community outside Charleston, South Carolina. Georgia is a urologist, and Jonah is a family medicine doctor. And the two of them really are everything to each other. Neither of them has any close family, and so this friendship is the most sustaining thing in their lives. And in fact, to me, the story centers around this concept of friendship as an absolutely fundamental human relationship. And I think that makes a lot of sense because, you know, your friends are the people that you pick. You're not bound to them by familial ties or sexual entanglement or romantic involvement. And in the case of Georgia and Jonah, there really is no possibility that they'll become romantically involved because Georgia is straight and Jonah is gay. And as the book opens, they have just figured out that something strange is going on in Jonah's medical practice. His patients are not showing up. And before too long, he is informed that if he wants to continue his employment with the clinic where he practices, this privately owned clinic, that he has to stop treating LGBTQ patients. And in particular, he has to stop treating transgender patients because the medical therapies for the trans people conflict with the beliefs of the hospital administrators. So he is given this ultimatum and he refuses to accept it, and he does wind up getting fired. And in the meantime, Georgia is out of the country when this crisis is going on for her best friend. And in fact, she's met a man to whom she's instantly attracted and starts her own romance with. And she finds out what's happening to Jonah and wants nothing more than to support the person that she loves the most. But she winds up actually making things incredibly much more worse for him. So I'm getting this question a lot, which is, why write this story? And I would say that as a physician myself, I am deeply interested in the intersection of medical care with cultural and political and legal realities. You know, who should be making decisions about medical care? Is that hospital administrators? Is it politicians? Is it insurance companies? Or is it doctors and patients? And I obviously am quite biased in favor of doctors and patients. But I do think that there is this overlapping issue of what should be legal when it comes to a reason for firing someone. I think a lot of people are very surprised to learn that in much of the United States, it is not actually illegal to fire someone because they are gay. It's not actually illegal in a lot of the United States to refuse housing to someone because they're transgender. And under certain circumstances, it is not actually illegal to refuse medical care on the basis of those two things. And that, I think, is genuinely shocking to people who have not experienced that. Now, all of this stuff is under consideration from the courts right now. In fact, the Supreme Court has already heard a case related to employment discrimination. And really, it is anybody's guess as to how they are going to rule. Now, I've been kind of joking that I know people want to hear legal analysis from a doctor as much as they want to get surgery from a lawyer. So I won't belabor all of the legal points. But I do want to say that there were two real life people who influenced this particular topic for me. Now, one is a sensitivity reader that I used when I was writing the book, who actually wound up becoming one of my dearest friends. And you can read an interview with him on my website if you are interested. He actually, ironically, really reminds me of the character of Jonah. The other person is a colleague of mine, not here, who was in real life given an ultimatum to stop treating transgender patients, refused, and was fired. So the book was loosely based on real events, although I did change the specifics considerably. So those are kind of the thematic issues in the book. For me, again, I feel like the story really centers around this profound friendship between the two main characters. I find that Georgia and Jonah share that really magical, indefinable chemistry that you sometimes stumble onto with another person who really gets you. So between the two of them, I think there's no artifice and there's no self-censoring, there's no filtering their personalities. They just really can be themselves with each other. They are both deeply flawed characters because you cannot write fiction about perfect people. So Georgia's bossy and she's bullheaded and she uses her fierce intelligence in questionable ways sometimes. And Jonah is impulsive. If anything, he's a little bit too empathetic, which gets him into trouble sometimes. And speaking of trouble, the two of them get into plenty of it. Together, they make a lot of dumb decisions, and probably more so than they would have apart from one another, which sort of made me feel like they were real people as I was writing them. Now, I do want to mention this book is the second book in a 3-book contract with Penguin. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the one that I have been writing for the last year, because it has turned out to be oddly timely. So ironically, this book is set in a brand new worldwide viral pandemic. It's about an infectious disease doctor who is traveling with her 2 children when this outbreak occurs. And my publisher was going to pitch it as The Hot Zone meets Sophie's Choice, because both of her children become deathly ill and she has access to only 1 dose of an experimental, but probably effective, brand new antiviral medication. And she has to select which of her children will receive it. So we've been thinking a lot about this over the last couple of weeks, and I think it's probably likely that the book won't be published, at least in the form that I had been writing it. I think if it had come out right now, it would probably be a bestseller. But who's going to want to read it a year from now when we have all lived it? I meant it to be a cautionary, this could really happen kind of tale. And now we know that this could really happen. I was somewhat loosely basing it on the 1918 influenza outbreak that killed possibly as many people around the globe as 100 million. And I did a ton of virology research. I interviewed people at the CDC and the WHO. And so my editor and I have been sort of tossing around, well, what do we do now? And we may still keep the pandemic background, but we're contemplating shifting the storyline away from the, which child gets saved, to focusing on a group of female physicians who become heroes during the pandemic and sort of demonstrating their experiences in different areas of the country. So I don't know what's going to happen with that. I'll keep you posted. I do want to touch on one other thing before I wrap up and give it back to Jenny for any questions. But I mentioned in the beginning of this talk how difficult it was for me to get published. And I would say that at least once a week, I get a phone call or an email or a text from somebody who's writing a book or who wants to write a book. And it reminds me that if there's one thing that is really universally beloved amongst human beings, it's the desire to hear a good story. But we do not all have access to the same resources that would make people be a good writer. A lot of people don't have access to computers or books at home. And I have told Jenny this before, but when I was little, I did not have access to the internet because really nobody had access to the internet then. However, I did not grow up in a wealthy household. I was raised in Eastern Kentucky in an area that was fairly historically challenged when it comes to resources. And I did have truly amazing parents. My mother founded a nonprofit in the Appalachians to empower the Appalachian people. And my father was a self-taught architect who designed and built energy efficient passive solar homes in the area. And once a week, my mom would take me to the closest town to us, to the library. And we would take a little red wagon and fill it up with books. And I literally read every single book in the children's library. And then I eventually moved on and I read every single fiction book in the adult library and a lot of the nonfiction books as well, especially in the area of popular science. So I think that tremendously influenced both of my careers. I grew up loving books, loving stories, loving literature. I became a real information junkie. And for that, I credit my parents, but I also definitely credit the public library. I would not be the same nerdy person you see before you had it not been for the library. And I do believe with my whole heart that reading does more than make you smart or informed. It makes you empathetic. It allows you to see the world through another human being's eyes every time you pick up a work of fiction, and transports you somewhere else into another culture, another land, and another viewpoint. It broadens your horizons. And ultimately, I think that is what fiction does the best. So, thank you.
Kimmery, thank you so much. Wonderful. And now I have some questions for you. First of all, you kind of went into details about your library story. But I have to tell you, I'm a little attached to Georgia and Jonah and Mark, the love interest. Will you come back to this story ever in another book? Because I really want to know what happens to these people. I've gotten a little attached to them. And I'm not too sad when I finish most books, but I was slowly reading it because I didn't want it to end. Will you finish that story?
Well, it's funny. I had no plans to do that, but since this next book is getting restructured, I went ahead and wrote the first couple of chapters in the last few days, and I decided it's going to be about 5 female physicians, and I decided to make Georgia one of them. So she's moving at the end of, well, actually, I shouldn't say, I don't want to give away any spoilers, but so I think she might be in the next book, the pandemic book, along with another character from the Queen of Hearts.
Oh, okay. Both very good books. I have to say my heart is with Antidote for Everything. This could be my favorite book in 2020.
No way.
It really is. And I've been reading a lot this year. I do have a question for you. What is, from our good friend Talia, what is your favorite children's book?
Hands down, Eloise. That was a very inspiring book to me as a child because, Eloise lives apparently without any adult supervision except for her nanny in the plaza in New York. And she's devious and curious and smart. She was just all kinds of interesting to me when I was a little girl growing up, in the mountains in Kentucky. But I also really like a children's book called Bink and Golly. And there's some parallels there because Bink and Golly are these two best friends who also apparently live without any parental supervision, and they get into a lot of shenanigans. So I think there's a theme there.
I guess so. I do have another question that has come in, and this is a serious question. Is it legal in North Carolina to refuse care to a member of the lesbian, gay, bisexual community?
Well, okay, I'll give the caveat that, again, I'm no kind of legal expert. And the stuff is changing so rapidly, and the laws are different depending on which city, municipality, county sometimes you live in. It is, I think, not legal to discriminate in North Carolina on the basis of those things for people that are state employees. What makes it kind of different right now is that there's supposed to be a provision in the Affordable Care Act preventing this anywhere in the country. And the Department of Health and Human Services currently has openly said they will not enforce those policies. So while technically it may be illegal to refuse medical care to someone, the Department of HSS is not going to go after anybody who does it. So if you were a trans person who was refused medical care, your only option would be to sue and to work your way through the courts, I think. I'd check with a real lawyer on that, though. I will say that I got to do a couple weeks of my book tour, and so I've been giving this talk to people, and people have been emailing me and coming up to me in person to tell me their stories of discrimination that they've encountered. And it is really awful, I think, for my profession to hear this. I've heard stories of people who were turned away from specialists because they didn't approve of their lifestyle. And sometimes this would be in a small town where there is no other choice if you want to get that particular specialty to see you. So I know that it is happening more than people might actually think, whether it's legal or not.
That question came from my wife, and during this time, we do worry a little bit about, if we had to seek medical care, but we have also special legal provisions that we have to pay for to make sure that we are safe. But thank you for answering that. The other question, I'm going to go other side of seriousness to fun, is what is your favorite quarantine cocktail?
I should probably very well, I'm a bourbon girl since I grew up in Kentucky, and I actually pretty much drink it on the rocks. My favorite bourbon right now is probably Blanton's, which is so hard to get.
Oh, fancy. Okay, Kimmery. I have one more question, and tell me what you are reading right now.
Okay, so I went to the bookstore and got a big stack of books at the start of this thing, and I tend to be terrible at remembering titles, but I just finished Long Bright River by Liz Moore. She wrote the book Heft. If you ever read that, I have that sitting here actually.
Long Bright River. Okay.
Incredible. Incredible. I just finished it. It's literary and it's a little bit haunting, and it's about a police officer in Philadelphia in the midst of the opioid crisis whose sister is a victim. And that sounds grim, but it's so beautifully written that you're just captivated by it.
Wow. Okay. Any last words for us? I don't think you covered the fact that you did sign back up to go back into the ER if they need you during this, the COVID virus. So I want to thank you and your husband for all the service that you are doing for us, and that you're willing to go back in there when you don't have to, and you signed up. So our hats are off to you and all you do. Any last parting words with us before I'm going to wrap up with a few items about where to buy your book?
Gosh, well, I do keep a running list. I'm a little bit behind, but I keep a running list on my website of what I'm reading generally.
What is that website, Kimmery?
KimmeryMartin.com.
Thank you.
So I have that on my website in case you're interested in what I'm reading at any given time, and I will definitely try to update it. I'm a big Instagram nerd, so if you're on, hashtag Bookstagram, follow me, and I'll update with book reviews and recommendations there as well.
Thank you. And for all those that are out there, oh yeah, please. Sorry, Kimmery.
I want to put in a plug for other Charlotte authors, and I know some are coming to talk to you on this very show soon, but there's quite a few of them out there, and I'm friendly with a lot of people who had their book tours cancel.
Yeah.
That's really devastating for a debut author in particular. So what I might do is post something soon about debut authors who've had their tours canceled so that y'all can follow them and hopefully support them and support the bookstores at this time.
Well, if you can convince them to be on our Final Draft Home Edition, we would be honored to host them and learn more about their books. So I also want to make sure everyone knows that you can buy Kimmery's book at Park Road Books here in Charlotte online. They are delivering as well as Main Street Books in Davidson. But if all else fails, please go to your library, cmlibrary.org, and download Kimmery's book. I do believe there's a wait list of 45 people right now. That was last week. Our next one is this Thursday. We are going to be partnering up with Kathy Pickens, another local author here in Charlotte that will be joining us at 7 o'clock. And if you are so inclined, we hope you liked what you saw tonight and will join us again every Tuesday, Thursday night at 7 o'clock. But also consider supporting your Charlotte Mecklenburg Library Foundation at cmlibrary.org. As well as, I believe there's going to be a screen popping up about how to text to give to us. So we thank you for joining us tonight. We look forward to seeing you Thursday night at 7 o'clock. You can see our schedule on our Facebook page. Kimmery, it's always wonderful to be with you. And again, I'm not lying. This is one of my favorite books I have read in a long time. And you have a great, promising career, and we're really honored to know you. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and it's my pleasure.
Good night, everyone.